Hey everyone, Daniel here, and in this video I'm going to be walking you through the basics of Quixel Mixer so you can get started fast while still having a solid foundation of the knowledge involved. Quixel Mixer shares some features with Substance by Algorithmic, except it's extremely helpful when it comes to using it with Megascans and Unreal Engine. Currently, Mixer is completely free, even for non-subscribers, so it's a great time to try it out. This lecture is meant to be an all-encompassing overview of Quixel Mixer, so it may be long-winded, so whenever you feel like you've got enough information and you want to start bringing things into Unreal, go ahead and move on to the next lecture where we will be doing exactly that. To download Quixel Mixer, go to quixel.com/mixer, and you can click this button that says Download Mixer Free. Once you've downloaded the installer, run through it to install Quixel Mixer onto your machine. Upon opening the new program, you'll need to create a new project by clicking this plus icon. I'll call mine Testing, and then create a new mix by clicking this button up here. I will also call this Test Mix. Now you can choose your PBR workflow, I'll stick with Specular, and your working resolution, which these can be changed later. When you're ready, click OK, and now your project will be open. Now a couple of things that you'll need to set before you get started is to go up to Edit and Preferences, and now you'll need to choose where you want your Mixer files to be stored, as well as where your local library of Megascans assets is. If you are a user of Megascans, either for Unreal Engine or for any other application, you'll need to browse to wherever your library of downloaded assets is. Once you've got all of that sorted out, click Save, and you're ready to get started. As far as the windows that you can see here, there's a viewport window where you can see what you're working on, a local library that contains all of the Megascans assets that you've downloaded, an online library where you can choose any of the assets in the Megascans library as long as you sign in, a layers window that displays all of the layers in the scene, a display window where you can change settings that have to do with the display, performance for performance settings, and an export window where you can export whatever you've been working on. In order to access the online assets, you'll need to sign in with your Megascans account. Now, since I'm an Unreal developer, I can sign in with Epic Games, and since unlimited free Megascans assets are available to Unreal developers, I now have infinite points on my balance and can download whatever I want. Let's go over the different kinds of layers that exist in Mixer. Now, the first one that will always be in your project is a plane. This is what you're looking at right now, and it's just a base geometry. So you can choose the size of this plane. I could make it 10 by 10 meters if that's how large of a mix I was making, or I could make it 1 by 1 if I wanted it to be much smaller. And you can also choose the working resolution to choose whether you'd like it to be 4K or 8K. That's experimental, so be careful with using 8K. I'm going to be sticking with 2K resolution and a 2 by 2 meter plane for this project right here, but we may work with a different size later in the video. The first kind of layer is a surface layer. Now this could be a material or it could be any kind of surface that you import. So to add a surface layer, click right here, and by default you'll be sent to your local library. But you can also go to the online library to add in a material that you don't yet have access to. I'll start with these wet sand footprints. Let's go over how to navigate in this window. To scroll in and out, you're going to scroll your mouse wheel. To pan side to side, hold down the mouse wheel, and to rotate around, hold Alt and left click and drag. You can also zoom in and out by Alt right clicking and dragging. Now let's go over some of the settings in here. The height intensity is one of the most important ones, and it's what tells the renderer how you want the displacement to be displayed. So the high frequency is going to look at the high details on whatever it is that you are displacing, and it will increase it or decrease it depending on what you set this to. The low frequency does the same, except for the lower points in the data. So you can use this to add a lot of depth, but sometimes it'll look a little weird in the silhouette if you do it too much. And those are some of the basic settings for the surface materials. Now let's move on to this next one, the decal layer. So if I add this, I can add any given decal to my scene, and I would go online perhaps to search for decals. And once you find one that you would like to use, you can select it in the online tab, choose download, and once it is downloaded, you can easily click it and drag it into the scene over whatever you'd like it to be placed on. Already this is looking pretty cool. So I can change a lot of settings now. I can choose whether it is blending from above, from below, or opacity masked, which is what I'm going to be using. I can choose the threshold, which chooses where it's going to end up. The radius, that affects how it blends with the materials around it. You can make it slightly transparent with this opacity slider. Now, wrap to base is an interesting one. This is going to make it mesh perfectly with the contours of the sand as long as you're placing it on sand. And if I were to remove this, it would become completely flat, but then we would have some of this drop off right on the edge. And so we're going to have to find ways to deal with that if that's what we end up doing. So I don't mind a little wrap to base. So that's what I'm going to have it at right now. Now you can also choose to remove the details of the base. So I think the best way to learn about this one is just to see it in action. So right now it's at 7, which is max base detail removal. Now if I went to 0, this is what we have now. And you can see that the grains of sand, the roughness textures of the grains of sand, that is now carrying over onto the manhole, as well as the footprints, it seems. So for something like a manhole, which wouldn't receive footprints since this appears to be a concrete and metal, you'd want to remove the base details as much as possible, because that is what's going to distinguish it from the surroundings. You can also adjust the high frequency and low frequency of decals as well to make it jut out even further. Now if you feel like somehow you've ruined the settings for your decal, what you can always do is click on this reset values and it will set right back to where it was. Remember, you can choose where the manhole will be placed just by sliding the offset. You can also rotate, and with decals you can rotate on an individual degree basis. It doesn't have to be 90 degrees at a time, because these are like stickers that are being slapped on, as opposed to base materials that can only be rotated a certain amount. You can also scale them up or down if you feel that they need to be larger or smaller. If you wanted a decal to be tiled, you could allow tiling to occur by checking tile X or tile Y, or both of them, and you can choose how many repetitions you want for each axis. Now the next kind of layer is a solid layer. Now it's just going to be a solid color, and something that I recommend for all of your projects is that you keep a solid layer at the very bottom of each mix, and you can rename it by double clicking on it and rename it into a base layer. And then you can build all of your materials on top of that. And now we have more options for each of the materials above, such as the sand, which we can now choose to blend from above or from below. I'm going to choose from above. And now we can mess with the threshold, like so. And with the manhole, we can choose to adjust the threshold with this as well, in response to the movement we made with the sand. This just ensures that we have maximum customability as far as all of the other materials besides the base layer. Now let's move on to one of my favorite layers, the liquid layer. This is going to add a solid liquid plane to whatever you're working on. And you can place it at any given height. And now I can fill the footprints with water or something similar to that, and it gives off an incredibly cool effect that I really enjoy. So you can edit much about this, such as the threshold, which you've already seen used, the radius, and again, notice how it is seeping in as I increase the radius. I would definitely suggest experimenting with radius yourself to truly learn about how it all works. You've got the detail, you've got the surface and the depth, and then you have moist, and this is one of the more important ones. So the threshold with moist is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to bring moisture to everything around it. So now it looks like mud, which is a cool effect on its own. I'm going to keep the moisture pretty low though. I want this to look like a beach with a manhole, a mysterious one. You can also choose the radius for the moisture. If you ever lose your place with these moisture settings, or you can't figure out how to get them back to default because for some reason they don't have a return to default settings next to this, you can always just add another liquid layer which will contain the default settings, and you can just copy them over. Remember, you can change the diffuse color of the water as well. However, the default color for this water works really, really well. Now the next layer is very interesting. It's a noise layer, and it's going to do some pretty interesting things to your scene. As you can see, it seems to add curvature to the entire plane, including the manhole, which we don't want that, so I'm going to bring the manhole above the noise so that it is overlaid on top of that. And as you can see, that seems to work out pretty well. Now let's talk about this noise. There's lots and lots of settings in here that you can mess with. One of them, the amplitude, is going to change how extreme the effect is. The frequency has to do with increasing the number of bumps per area, as you can see, and a lot of this is going to take some experimentation to learn all of the different settings. Octaves is going to increase the detail of this noise. Gives it a really crusty look. You could increase it all the way and then decrease the frequency. And what that will have is just a rocky sand dry effect, because now this sand looks pretty dry compared to how it did like this. So I'm just going to use it to create a bit of a rolling hill effect on this area. I'm also going to bring up the manhole a bit by adjusting the threshold. And you may start to notice something like this, which is easily fixable. All you need to do is work with the radius a little bit, maybe bring it down just a little bit more. Now the only concern here is that I don't want anything to come over the manhole too much and distract from that. So if I were to increase the amplitude so much that you have this giant lip, which clearly does not look very good, that would be a big problem. So don't bring the amplitude up that much. Something like this is absolutely acceptable. Just keep playing with the settings until you see something that you really like, and then you can stick with that. So I'm going to mess with the noise just a bit more on this. And well, that's that. And if you do end up having any big problems, you can always offset the texture so that there's no parts that are going to affect it too much. You probably don't want footprints going under this. You want it to seem like it was installed beforehand, so try to minimize that as much as you can. You always want to be thinking about the story of the material that you're making. This looks pretty good to me. This looks very good. And remember, on the flip side of that, you can always adjust the placement of the manhole itself. After that, there is only one more layer, and that is the paint layer. Now, with painting, you can do a whole lot of things. You can import an image, you can draw on it. There's so much that you can do, and you'll get this brush interface with all these kinds of different brushes. You'll start out with this brush, and you can edit the curve with these settings right here. And then you can begin to draw displacement on. I'm going to just click on the diffuse, and now I can just draw onto the diffuse itself. Remember, you can adjust the diffuse color on this side this time. So if it was graffiti, we could turn it light blue, hit apply, and for this we'd probably want a smaller brush size, so you can change the brush settings up here. Not that small. You could draw a big old letter in here. And then you can erase with the eraser tool very simply. Very nice. Now if you were doing graffiti, I would probably change the opacity downwards a little bit, because you'd want color to show through, because spray paint usually fades over time. Remembering story as you're creating is very important. As you can see, as you draw over certain parts, again, it'll become brighter, and that is realistic. If you are doing spray paint, remember that as you spray over certain parts, it has the same effect because you're adding more layers of paint onto the original stroke. If you want to learn about graffiti, I would go on Google and find some reference images for it. And also remember that the effect is going to bleed a little bit, so turn the opacity way down and get a bigger brush, and you can start bleeding it to other parts of the mesh. And that is one way that you can use the paint layer. Another way is to put textures, mess with the gloss. Say you wanted one specific streak to be extremely glossy. You could take this brush, turn the gloss white, apply, start drawing on this one spot. And now if you look at it in the sunlight, you can see that it is much more glossy just by painting on it. So I probably wouldn't make it that opaque, and you can always erase. But it's as if you can draw moisture onto the surface, and it's a very helpful thing. So I'm going to turn the opacity down. I can just start clicking, and it's like I'm adding little spots of irregularity. And it just adds just that small touch, but it could be worth a whole lot to your scene. Now, moving on to the more technical side of things, let's go over all of the display and performance settings. So as far as the background, I can change it from a gradient to a flat color to a skybox. And I can change the skybox with these up here: indoors, fluorescent, studio. And it's all trying to mimic real life scenarios, because these are skyboxes, which are HDRs, which carry real world lighting data. So I like to stick with either studio or pizza. And I can turn this back off by just going from background, from skybox to gradient. I can choose the lighting intensity, the light rotation. This one is a good one to play around with to make sure that your mix will look good from all lighting angles. And as far as the shadow resolution, I have mine at very high. GPU tessellation, yours may be set lower at first, and then you're going to get some weird results. But I set mine as 10 to get the maximum quality tessellation. To change your settings for your project, you can click on the original plane. You can choose the size of what you're working with. However, that will mess you up if you were already working on something. So I'm going to go back to my 2x2. And you can also change the working resolution. So I could go from 2048 to 4096. And what this will do is crank up the resolution of all the textures that you are working with. So as you can see, this is starting to look very, very nice. And if you are feeling risky, you can change it up to 8K resolution, but they will tell you with a message that it is experimental and you'll want to save before you do it. So on that note, to save, go up to File and choose Save. And then you can name your mix, so Test Mix. Click Save. And maybe we'll try out our 8K resolution. Now, probably don't use 8K resolution for production because you may encounter some problems with it. I personally have seen Mixer crash because of 8K resolution, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for production, but for testing it out and making cool art, definitely try it out. And it looks like it has loaded. It's running considerably more slowly, but the textures are definitely in 8K resolution, which is incredible. You can see the individual holes in the sand. So you heard it here first. Yes, it's cool, but definitely don't use it for production. This is extremely slow, and I'm dying to get back to my 2K resolution. It's up to you to decide whether the performance cost is worth the results. For high resolution, just know that it will slow down your workflow and be more performance intensive on whatever project you intend to use it for. Now that you've followed along with that project, you're almost ready to begin bringing your projects into Unreal. But first, let's test your skills and create a swamp floor. Now, I want you to interpret this however you would like. Just get started, and I'm going to be walking through my process on this video, but if you want to, you can just skip ahead and post your results either in the Q&A or the submissions, and I'm excited to see what you come up with. So I'm going to start with a solid layer as a base solid. I'm going to add a surface layer on top of that. I think I'm going to start with a grassy forest roots on top of that one. It looks like it's coming up from below there. So I'm going to start with that. I'm also going to change the high frequency up and the low frequency as well. Again, adjusting the threshold. And I'm going to bring down the radius a bit because I want this to be a solid base for us to work with. Now, I'm going to see what other layers we have to work with here. These are just ones that I have downloaded. And I think what's going to have to happen here is that I'm going to use one of these other ones that I've worked with before, such as this Japanese mossy ground. And that'll be another surface. And we're gonna have to just mix these in. I'm gonna use a noise layer between these. I'm gonna turn up the amplitude a bit. Just like that. I'm also going to turn up the frequency, not the octaves. I'm going to turn up the frequency. Now I can adjust the amplitude back down. I think frequency needs to actually be less like that. Amplitude needs to be more. Perfect. Now I can mess with the persistence, clarity. Now as far as this mossy ground goes, I can choose to either wrap it to the base or to not do that. I'm going to choose to not do that. I'm also going to remove the base details for those. I'm going to bring up the high intensity just so we can really get these rocks in here. I think they're pretty nice looking. And then for the low frequency, that can go as well. I just don't want it to look ridiculous. But it doesn't, it's tasteful. And now we can figure out the placement. I like these rocks in the corner. And then with the noise, I think I'm going to, well, let's add in the liquid layer. I always like a liquid layer when I'm going to want that on top of everything else. I like to add a liquid layer in most of my grounds. You've probably seen this look in video games a lot. And if you want to tile this, by the way, just to see what it's going to look like tiled, you can click that button right there. So obviously with the mounds, it looks pretty tiled. So we can work with this a little bit. So you can go ahead and mess with the noise quite a lot. I'm going to extend the size of my plane a little bit, because otherwise it would be pretty unfortunate. I don't really like when there's too much repetitiveness, especially in a floor material. So this is starting to look pretty good, especially with 4K textures. Not too repetitive. Not too repetitive at all. It looks good. And remember, you can change the repetitions of the main material here. But I think this is about perfect. And if I turn on tiling, I can see that it's not too repetitive. It's interesting to look at, and I can definitely see foliage being attached to it. This is a pretty good swamp material. Now the only other thing would be to add some decals and some paints if you would like. So I'll search around for some decals and see if there's any that would add to the scene. You don't want to be adding if it's not going to add to the scene. But things like green leaves, that could be interesting. So anything is worth trying out if you think it's going to be adding to your scene. So I'll put in these green leaves here and we'll see what we can do with them. Yes, that is very cool. That is very nice looking. And we can try and mask them out of the way if we would like. So I'm going to bring them on top. And I'll see what it looks like when they're covering some of the water. Maybe that isn't necessary. We can always turn the threshold. We can always try and bring them from above and bring the threshold down a bit. Except that's going to cut it off in inappropriate places, potentially. I think that actually is looking very good. We can choose to preserve details. Now radius, again, is going to help blend it into the other surfaces. I do want them to pop though, so I'm going to adjust the frequencies. That's looking very nice. Very, very nice indeed. Now remember, with decals, you can change the rotation in a whole lot of ways. But this is looking good to me. I think this resembles what I would think of a foresty, swampy floor. Absolutely. So I'll just look around and see if there's any other decals that would be appropriate for this. I'm I'm going to try and add a buffalo grass patch layer above everything else, and I'm going to see what that looks like if we can layer some of that over the water. Now clearly this doesn't match the color, so we can work with that. We can change the diffuse and make it darker a bit. Ah, that's nice. So you can use that eyedropper tool to try and match other colors of your scene. Because I don't want it to be too light or saturated. I suppose it's not the end of the world if it's lighter, but it's the saturation that is going to kill the vibe. So I'm gonna keep it low key. I'm gonna keep it dark. So it's the lighter color. So I want to get the hue correct. Once I get the hue correct, if it's too light, then I can just bring it down in here. I like the orangey color. Bring that brightness right down. You can apply that, and you can adjust the opacity. That's probably even a better way. And look at that. That is beautiful. That is simply stunning. Now if I turn on tiling, beautiful. Beautiful. If I look at it from above, it's beautiful. And the best part about this material is if I look at it from this angle, it's kind of hard to tell that it's repetitive, and that is something that is simply indispensable when you're designing levels. As you've seen in many of the other levels, especially from a farther away view, any kind of repetition becomes more and more apparent. But with this, it only becomes apparent when you're about this far away, which ideally the player would not be without having some foliage and trees overshadowing most of it, which would fix more repetition. So I guess the only thing that I want to fix about this is to turn the leaves a little more crispy. And so I want to change the high frequency up a bit. Not too much, but enough to where it's a noticeable difference. I want them looking like they're actually on the surface, which that works just fine right there. I'm gonna mess with the height of these buffalo grass patches as well. I'm gonna turn off tiling while I'm editing. That will affect your performance while editing, just so you know. And since these are kind of harder to see up close individually, I'm going to give myself a little more leeway with that. And well, this is my mossy floor as far as a forest floor or a swamp floor. This has been a full intro to Quixel Mixer for beginners, and I would definitely suggest using these tools for any ground floors for your projects and for anything that needs more than one material. Quixel Mixer is excellent for this. If you've watched this entire video, thank you. So once you're ready, we'll be exporting this to Unreal Engine and we'll see what we can do with it there.